today we're going to talk about, as I mentioned before, how colleges actually evaluate applicants. I've spent a lot of time going through this in a lot of detail because my company Prompt focuses on supporting students with admissions essays. We work with thousands and thousands of students every year, and we were very curious just in terms of how much do essays actually matter in the admissions process, right? How kind of can they or can they affect your student or not affect your student? And then what are all the other factors that also matter here? All right. So let's first go into what does my audience actually care about, right? So that's kind of like the first and foremost thing that you kind of need to think about, really with like any writing topic, but also it really matters when you are thinking about it from the college admissions office perspective, because what they care about is ultimately like what gets you into a college or what does not get you into a college. All right. So that's kind of the primary factor here. And so the main thing to think about, like, as you're like, do I get in? Do I not get in? How are colleges evaluating me? Is what they really are trying to evaluate you on is, will you succeed in college and after you graduate? Okay. So for example, the Dean of Admissions at Emory University specifically says the admissions process is about evaluating potential. Okay. So they want to see your potential to succeed academically, as well as within the college community, within college. And they also want to see, in many cases, almost view you outside of college after you graduate, and what are the effects that you can potentially have on the world. All right. So how do they actually score applicants? So this is a chart that I put together that really kind of distills it down in a good way, right? So basically there's two sides of the application, right? There's the academics and then non-academics. The simplest way to think about this is you get an academic score and you get a personal score for non-academics. Now, for some colleges, the personal score might be actually a couple of different scores. So for example, at Harvard, they have an activity score and they have a personal score. At Emory, they have a activity score, extracurricular score, and they have a intellectual curiosity score, right? So different schools call these different things, but the easiest way to look at it is academics versus non-academics, okay? And we're actually take a look at data and like how does this distribute kind of across all applicants. But let me talk about kind of how these scores are generally calculated first. So the academic score, we'll start with that. So the academic score is more hard numbers, essentially, right? So if you think about it from a certain perspective, they're taking your grades, they're taking your standardized test scores, the strength of your curriculum, potentially your AP exam scores, or IB scores if you're in an IB curriculum, and they're taking all of that information in. And many schools are actually calculating what they call their own academic index, okay? So they take your transcripts, they take all of this information on your test scores, and they feed it into their own algorithm where they calculate just exactly kind of like, okay, based off of what we know that students are doing that are successful at our college, we're going to calculate a score associated with the student's academic profile. Okay, so for example, at Harvard, they do this, and their academic score is out of 80, okay? And roughly 8,000 students per year to Harvard get a perfect academic score of 80. All right. Now, some schools, what they will do is they're kind of weighting different classes in different ways. So for example, AP Calculus may be weighted higher than another class. Okay. Additionally, they may actually remove certain classes like driver's ed grades. They might remove gym class grades. They might remove band or theater related grades, stuff that they may not consider directly applicable to succeeding academically at the college. Okay, so that's another kind of consideration here. Some schools actually don't even look at freshman year grades, right? So they don't even use that to calculate as part of their academic index, because they know that some students are struggling to get in the swing of things with high school. And so really they're looking at mostly sophomore year grades, junior grades, and potentially your first semester of your senior year, depending on when you are applying, okay? Now, the exact score of your academic index is not necessarily equal to the academic score that they will give you on your application, right? And part of that is because they also look at your academic score within context. And within context generally means within your high school environment. So certain high schools don't, like high schools are not the same, right? They don't have the same curriculum. They don't have the same opportunities for given students. Students may have different socioeconomic backgrounds from different schools. And so they try to also take in that into account when calculating what your academic score will be when they give that for your application, right? So that's really important, right? The academic score is, by and large, probably the most important thing because it is based off of a longer time horizon that you have existed within your grades for all of your courses. And there are very strong correlations between how well you perform academically in high school and how well you perform academically in college, okay? So the academic score really matters. But as we'll see in just a minute, students actually self-select where they're applying based off of their academic profiles. So many applicants look very similar from an academic profile perspective, and that's where the non-academic scores or the personal scores really matter a lot, okay? And so what you see here is that the personal score also matters. And basically, as your personal score goes up and your academic score goes up, your chances of admissions also goes up. One other thing that I'll highlight here is there's an academic bar. So colleges know that below a certain academic score, you're unlikely to succeed academically at that college. So your admissions chances effectively drop to zero, all right? There's also a personal bar, which is fairly similar. In that if you are below it, you might actually have possible character flaws, and so your admissions chances will be extremely, extremely low if you're below that, but that is actually quite rare. Okay, so what does this generally mean? Kind of what exactly does this mean within the context of everything here? Well, we're going to take a look at that actually right now. So how does the scores actually break down? So fortunately for us, Harvard had some court litigation related to their admissions process over the past few years. And so they actually had to publicly release their data. That's really the only reason why we're using Harvard, because we actually have their data in most admissions offices at colleges, and rather all admissions offices at colleges are really tight-lipped in terms of actually, they might talk a little bit about how they score applicants, but they never say like how many get a certain score, how many have a certain profile, how many are doing different things, because colleges want to have complete autonomy over who they ultimately select in the colleges. So we're going to take a look at the academic score distribution, then we're going to take a look at the personal score distribution. And the really important thing to understand here, as we just talked about, is that students are self-selecting where they are applying based off of their academic score. All right. So at Harvard, of the approximately 40,000 applicants per year at Harvard, although that number went up quite a bit this past year, but in previous years between 2015 and 2019, roughly 83% of all Harvard applicants were above their academic bar. That means that Harvard believes that based off of their academic profile, that the student likely would have succeeded academically at Harvard. So let me sink in again. 83% of all Harvard applicants are above their academic bar. And this is very common across a lot of schools that are highly selective schools or selective schools, right? Even with admit rates less than 50%. We're going to talk about different schools and how they use academic score, personal score, et cetera, in just a minute, different profiles of schools. But this is really important, right? Harvard accepts about 2,000 students a year. They had about 40,000 applicants. 83% of those applicants were above their academic bar. So what is the thing that really differentiates students, right? As you can see here, strong academics doesn't really differentiate students all that much because 42% of all applicants had strong academics. As we mentioned before, 8,000 students that are applying to Harvard actually had like a perfect 80 out of 80 on their academic index, right? So what they're now doing at Harvard and many other highly selective schools is they use the personal score to identify kind of which students are differentiating themselves. And the way that they do that is through the recommendations, the students' essays, their activities lists, and their additional information section, and potentially an interview. Okay. all of that combined together they will use to generate one score, the personal score, or maybe two scores if they have an extracurricular score and a personal score, for example. Okay, so they're basically reading all the non-academic parts of your application and coming up with one sense of your profile. And we're going to talk later about how does that actually matter from an essays perspective. It matters quite a bit in terms of like what you should be writing about in your essays and what people care about on essays. But this is really important, right? Is that your non-academic profile, it's your strength of your recommendations and how strong your school is polling for you. It's your essays, it's your activities list and your activity list descriptions, and it's your additional information section. And as you can see here from the Harvard information is that almost every applicant that applies is sufficient. So basically, if you read, another terminology in the admissions world is like you read flat. So in other words, you're kind of like, I don't really know if this student is exceptional or not. For their non-academic profile, they read as like a typical student, right? That's roughly 4 and 5 applicants, right, are in this sufficient category. Now, to be below the personal bar is very rare, as we just talked about. And that's because you basically need to, through your application, whether or not that's in your recommendations or in your essays, you need to potentially have questionable characteristics, right? Or questionable like personal characteristics or morals or other things like that might come out in the application, which would effectively disqualify you from admission. But what this means is that strong personal scores are actually only 1 in 5 applicants. And as you see here, an exceptional score is actually fewer than 10 applicants a year at Harvard actually have an exceptional personal score. So the key here is to move from the typical, reads flat application to the strong profile. And by doing that, you can actually increase your chance of admission by 10x. So essentially this sufficient category has about a 2.5% chance of admission. And this strong category has about a 25% chance of admission. And in reality, of the 2,000 admits a year at Harvard, 75% of them actually come from this strong personal score profile, right? This is why the non-academic side of your application and really kind of how you make your personal brand, what you actually write about in your applications, what your recommenders even write about, how an interview might go if the school has an interview, all of that is of critical importance. For example, even at Harvard, they will, if you have a portfolio and you submit that portfolio and it might have a research paper that you've written in it, for example, I know a lot of school students do that, but I'm just giving this as an example, or you might have an art portfolio, or you might have something else like that. They will actually take that portfolio and they might even give it to a professor of art or within the topic that you wrote your paper on and actually ask for that professor's opinion on the quality of your work. Okay. Like all of that kind of comes into like this personal score or, these other factors, or sometimes even affects the academic score that you ultimately get. So this really matters a lot. Now, when you put both of these together, this is what it looks like. So every dot that you see here is actually 10 applicants, okay? And so what you see here, and this is really important, right, is that just above the academic bar and just above the personal bar is a lot of applicants, right? And there's also a lot of applicants that are, very high on the academic score, strong academic score, but, not, just sufficient on a personal score basis. And so where you really start differentiating yourself is by moving to the, the strong personal scores, right? That's what really matters. And ideally you want to be in a strong academic and strong personal score area. But it's sometimes hard to control that because your academics are what they are at this point. And so essentially kind of how does this break down, right? Only 1 in 3 applicants are strong academic and sufficient personal, or sufficient academic, sufficient personal, right? Below 1 in 10 applicants are actually in the strong academic, strong personal, or strong personal, sufficient academic profile, right? So this is what really matters, right? This is why the personal side of the application really matters, especially at highly selective institutions. And so the easiest way to think about this is that if you're looking at like a small, highly selective college, let's say under a 15% admit rate, about 75% of their admits basically fall into these categories within this blue line, right? So they are taking, the top students from both academic and personal score profiles, but there's also other considerations that they're giving, right? So occasionally, like you're getting people that are admitted down here, you're getting people that are admitted here. Very rarely you get people that are admitted here. It's like less than 0.1% of all admits are not at least strong on one category of things. And so that's why this really, really, really matters. Just understanding like how are they actually going to evaluate my application? How are they going to think about my academic score? Honestly, for each college, it's really hard for you to know whether or not you're in the strong or sufficient academic score category, right? They don't publish this information particularly well. A lot of, and by the way, it sometimes varies by major. So for example, even at Harvard, where they supposedly don't care what major you're doing because you're not applying to a certain major, you're applying to the school. They do ask what your future career plans are. And the admission rate for if you're going for, planning to have a career in some sort of medical field is actually like 4%. And the admission rate, if you want to be a teacher, is like 11%, for example, right? So these colleges, like part of what they care about is having students that are going to go affect a lot of different parts of the world, do a lot of different things, have effects on a lot of different industries, a lot of different people, a lot of different geographies. And so they actually do care about like, what maybe you want to go do. At some other schools where you're applying to a specific major, some majors are more competitive than others, right? So the academic profile for some students admitted to certain majors may vary, especially like computer science at Carnegie Mellon, for example. So how does this look when, as admissions rates increase, right? Essentially, as admissions rates increase, this bar here just keeps moving down, right, to deeper and deeper into the qualified applicant pool, all right? And this really matters because when you look at a lot of people that get into institutions that do not have particularly strong personal scores, it's because they are applying places where they actually have quite strong academic scores, relatively speaking. And, the class size or the admissions rate at the institutions are such that, okay, they're going to take students that are in that kind of academic profile without really needing to look at the personal score. This is really common for large public state institutions where they're looking at this from, okay, first and foremost, we're going to take a look at this from an academic score perspective. We're going to take everybody that has super high academic scores, and then we're going to start picking off people that have some strong personal scores as well, but only sufficient academics, okay? And that may also have other factors that come into it, like such as, there's certain targets that some schools have for certain numbers of students from like certain socioeconomic backgrounds or certain ethnicities or certain like geographies even. So something else to kind of consider here, but what you want to do is kind of look at the admissions rates. The higher the admissions rate, and especially like the larger, which also has to be like the larger the class size, just having strong academics may be enough for you, to be admitted without having also a strong personal score from a, having really strong essays perspective, for example. Okay. So that's something that's really important to kind of think about here is, okay, where am I likely to fall on the academic score profile for a given institution to understand how important essays are for me? Now, as mentioned, it's hard to figure out your academic score because they're not publishing like percentage of applicants that have, taken 5 or more AP exams and scored an average of 4.5 on them, right? There's not many institutions that are publishing that information. And as I said, sometimes this varies by major, right? So certain majors, especially like computer science, medical related ones, certain institutions have like drama at Carnegie Mellon is extremely competitive, right? And so some institutions, even at larger publics, may have certain majors that act like a very low admissions rate, right? So for example, computer science at the University of Washington. You also may look at it as, oh, I'm applying to the University of Michigan, but I'm out of state. Well, in that case, you're also going to maybe have a lower admissions chance as well, because, certain schools have, certain populations of out-of-state people they take and in-state people they take. And there might just be a lot more out-of-state applicants. That could be possible too for the number of slots that they have. right? So you have to look at these different factors. And as I always say is like, look, it doesn't actually take that long to write really well about yourself. And so you should just focus on that and really presenting kind of the best, putting your best foot forward and being confident in the applications that you are submitting, right? So I'm going to talk about that for a minute or two here. Then I'm going to go and take a look at some questions. But I wanted to share this data with you all because this is really important, right? Strong academics can actually increase your admission chances by about 3x, typically, all right? Now, strong non-academics, right, which is the essays part, can increase your admission chances by up to 10x, all right? So that can have a bigger effect, not to mention probably your academic profile is not completely set, but more or less set, by the time that you actually are heading into the fall semester of your senior year, right? So you have a pretty good sense of that. You're going to self-select probably where you're going to apply based off of that information. And, now what you want to do is look at, okay, what are the admissions rates for the school, the major that I'm applying to, whether or not it's in-state or out-of-state, how does my academic profile stack up to other students? A good way to look at that might be like average GPA of admitted students, or if you have taken standardized test scores, you can see kind of how hot, where your standardized test scores might fit in with the published test scores. So if you're in like the top quartile of students that are admitted for a school, that's generally a good sign that you might end up in that strong, academic category. But as I said, you really just want to put your best foot forward, right? Which is why we always, really push hard on students to, spend the time and really think through from an essays perspective what to do. And so I'm going to talk about that for just a couple of minutes. And then, as I said, I'll get to the other stuff. All right, cool. So once again, let's remember the purpose of the college application is to prove that you will be successful in college and beyond, right? Now, what that means is actually the entire biggest myth here that a lot of students are told is that essays are about storytelling. That is not true. Storytelling is a small component about it, but essays are actually about your content and your content that proves that you're going to be successful in college and beyond, right? So as I mentioned before, the Dean of Admissions at Emory said the entire admissions process is about finding potential, right? And most admissions officers agree with that, right? And to find potential, they need to understand that your experiences that you've had to date, right, exhibit certain traits that you have that are likely indicators of your future success, right? That is the most important thing. We're going to talk really quickly about the 5 traits, which many of you on this may have heard about already, but I'm going to give a quick refresher on those. But this is really important, right? Essays are not about storytelling. It's not about having a great analogy. It's not about using beautiful prose. It's not any of that. And the reason why it's not any of that is specifically because they're looking for students that are going to be successful in college and beyond, but also how do they calculate the personal score? What did we just talk about? They're looking at your essays, your recommendations, your activities list, your additional information section. They're looking at that in totality to understand who you are, and then they give you a score as well as write some notes based off of that information. And that's really important because it's not like they're scoring each individual essay. Most of the time, they don't really care much about your grammar. I mean, obviously, if you have blatant grammar mistakes, that's a problem. But even the University of California system, if you look at their rubrics and how they score the essays and how they look at this, like there's no mention. They specifically tell their essay readers not to look at grammar, okay? And so this is what really matters, right? It's about your content, and it's about how you structure content in a really clear and readable way. So that way your story, what matters to you, your traits come across to your admissions officers that are reading this. And unfortunately, fortunately for you all, but unfortunately for most students, is they're told to tell their story, and they write a really nice narrative about some life event that they have. But at the end of the day, I don't really learn much about the student. I don't learn that they're going to be successful in college and beyond. I don't learn that they actually have these 5 traits, right? Which the 5 traits are drive, intellectual curiosity, initiative, contribution, diversity, experiences. I'm going to spend 1 minute just covering these really quickly. And then we're going to wrap up here and take a bunch of questions. So the 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants. The first is drive, right? So these are students that push themselves to succeed no matter how long the odds. They go through difficult situations and they come out a better person. Colleges love driven students because when driven students come across a challenge, they're going to work really hard. They're going to get past those challenges. They're going to come out better people. That's really important because they know that you're going to come across different challenges while you're in college, while you're in life. These are the types of students that succeed. This is so important that there's a whole group of consortium of colleges that meet kind of every year at Harvard, and they talk about this. And the word that they always use is grit. I prefer drive, but it's very, very similar, right? Is that these are students that are going to persevere, get through any difficult situation. The second is intellectual curiosity. These are students that love to learn just for the fun of it, right? So in your free time, you are learning and gaining a deeper understanding about different subjects or topics in which you're interested in, right? Schools love intellectual curiosity. What do we talk about? The personal score at Emory University is literally called intellectual curiosity. There are essays at WashU in St. Louis and Stanford University that are specifically asking about intellectual curiosity, right? And these are very well-known kind of supplemental essays that you need to write for these schools. And so intellectual curiosity really matters because students that are intellectually curious are more likely to succeed academically in college because they're really interested in what they're learning about. Third is initiative. So these are really entrepreneurial students. No matter what group or organization they're a part of, they're not really willing to accept the status quo. They're always thinking of ways to make it better. And not just thinking of ways, but acting on those ways to make whatever organization they're a part of better. The fourth is contribution. So these are students that whatever group of people that they're a part of, that group of people is better as a result of their being there. Okay. And then finally, diversity of experiences. So we just talked about colleges are looking to have like an impact on all different areas of society, right? And so they want students with a bunch of different life experiences, different ways of thinking about the world that can add unique perspectives to the student body, but also they don't want everybody to go into finance, right? They don't want everybody to go into computer science, right? They want people to be teachers. They want people to be nurses. They want people to be doctors. They want people to be in business. They want people to be lawyers. They want people to be community organizers, right? Politicians, etc. Like all sorts of different types of people they want people to be. And so they want people with different interests, different backgrounds, different, all that sort of stuff to kind of come into play here. All right. So before I get to the questions, last thing here for today is we have a special thing because this week is College Essay Week here at Prompt. We've had hundreds of students sign on to work with us on essays. We have two really cool things that we're doing right now that you can get extra $10 off on if you go to prompt.com/college essay week. You get that extra $10 off for tonight only, okay? And I'm going to show you that landing page here right now. And I highly recommend doing this. I said hundreds of people are actually doing this week already. Let me just pull it up. So as I said, you can go to prompt.com/essay week, prompt.com/essay week. And what you'll see here is we have a couple of options, right? We have this essay masterclass, which is a small group class, up to 10 students in a group. You have 2 live sessions next week on the 29th and the 1st. And those 2 sessions, you're led, kind of facilitated time by our expert writing coaches, who are the top 2% of all writing coaches in the world. And then every student that goes through that gets 2 rounds of feedback actually on their essay from a prompt writing coach, okay? Then we also have our one-on-one coaching. The one that you see here is our special partner high school price because we have worked with a couple of hundred high schools here. And so they've already gotten a special discount for this week. I think it ends June 26th, so very quickly, very shortly for $299. But tonight, if you get this, you can get it for $289. Okay, and we have a couple thousand students that are already doing this, but basically you get one-on-one coaching, unlimited support with one of our essay coaches on the common application personal statement essay. You can eventually upgrade into doing all of your supplements essays with your coach if you want to do that. But you get one-on-one personal video coaching calls. You get feedback on every single draft of your essay from your personalized writing coach. The typical student is doing 2 video coaching calls before they actually start kind of writing their drafts, getting feedback on their drafts, revising their drafts. And so usually within about 3 to 4 drafts, they're done. The great part about both of these programs is our goal is for your student to be done with their essay within a week, right? This is really important because finishing your essays before the next semester starts means that you will actually have spent, you'll be able to enjoy senior year more. You'll actually be able to spend the time on the essays now, which is really probably about 6 to 8 hours total of your time over a week to get to a really good essay, and then additional time on supplements. But you don't want to be doing this like the night before the essay is due. Actually, 90% of all applications for colleges are submitted within 2 days of a deadline. You don't want to be one of those people. You don't want to kind of come at the last minute and trying to scramble and write essays. It shows on the applications. Like the dean of admissions at Richmond was telling me, he's like, yeah, I actually care about that. When I'm reading essays, I could tell if this was kind of maybe just thrown together last minute, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to really focus on this, get it done now, get that stress kind of off of your plate. If you get the one-on-one coaching, you don't even have to do it next week. You can sign up and start that at any time. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. As I said, you can get that extra $10 off tonight. Just go buy one of these. If you're not one of our partner high schools, just go to prompt.com and you can get your pricing there. We do ask which high school you're from as you go through that process. So please do that. As I said, do it tonight. Our development team is going to wake up tomorrow morning and they're going to turn off that extra $10 off. So I highly recommend doing that this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that may have come in at this point. But as I said, please go to prompt.com/essayweek and you can go ahead and get started. We have hundreds of students doing it this week already. All right.